Hey everyone! On today's podcast, we're interviewing Dr. Anthony Chaffee.
He's a medical doctor specializing in neurosurgery, and he's a former All American rugby player.
He has a lot of experience with the carnivore diet, over 20 years to be exact.
In this podcast, we're not really going to go into sort of his background and story as much. We're sort of just going to get on with the questions we found really interesting. And if you want to get to know him a little bit better, you can always check out his YouTube and Instagram channels, linked in the show notes and mentioned at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, we hope you enjoy the show. So our first question is, what are your perspectives on using plants as medicine, like using plants temporarily for medicinal purposes?
Yeah, I mean, anything can be used, medicinally temporarily. That's fine. We've been doing that for thousands of years, and so that's okay. And just like any medicine, you don't take medicine on a daily basis. So that's the thing. It's like, well, but garlic is good as an antibiotic. It's like, great. Do you have a bacterial illness? Like, no. Okay, well then don't eat garlic, right? So you wouldn't take antibiotics if you didn't have a bacterial infection, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how I think about it as well. So a medicine is just a poison that confers more benefit than harm in a certain situation, right? But outside of that situation, it's just causing harm. Okay, so if you're out in the woods and you have a problem and you know which herbs will help with that problem, sure. When you're outside of that scenario and you don't have a problem, obviously you shouldn't be touching them. But also, this is the difference between naturopathy and traditional Western medicine. And like naturopaths would say, well, you should have the plant like foxglove that contains digoxin because maybe there's other things in that plant that are helping with that, but they can't tell you what they are, and they also can't tell you what dosages it will take. 3 ounces or 2 grams of leaf. Okay, but how was it grown? What soil? What conditions? Was it dry? Does it need to be fresh? All these different things matter, and so you don't actually know what you're getting, and you certainly don't know your dosage. And so you have to contend with that as well. Whereas if you're taking a pill as a medicine, you will hopefully be able to trust that this is exactly what you're getting, and this is the exact dose that you're getting, so you can be much more accurate with that. And you're also not bringing along the tens of thousands of other chemicals that exist in that plant that you're not trying to get as well. So yes, with an asterisk.
Yes.
So you want almost naturally derived medicines that have been sort of dosage controlled for medical applications.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so yeah, I mean, at some point these things could be beneficial if you're in dire straits, but it would also be probably better to try to get that in pill form when you know exactly what you're getting and it's not coming along with other things as well.
Okay, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree pretty much exactly with that.
Yeah. Well, I used to be that person that thought everything natural was better, so I'd always look for the more natural alternative to everything. But then as I
Yeah.
learned more about all the plant toxins, I started wondering maybe it's better to just take the standard pill because you don't know what other toxins and like chemicals you're getting in the plants where the medicine was more controlled. So I like stopped believing like, oh, the natural alternative is always the better one. But that I
Yeah.
used to
No,
think
that
that for years.
yeah, exactly. And that's something that people still argue that you should get this in its natural form, but that plant isn't making that chemical to help with your heart disease.
Yes.
It's actually making that chemical to screw with your heart and mess it up and probably give you a heart attack. And take too much digoxin, it will give you a heart. You will have an arrhythmia and you will die.
Yeah.
And so it is a very tight window where it benefits you, and it only benefits you if you have a specific problem.
Yes.
And outside of that problem, it's going to cause harm. And again, you're right. And it's going with a whole host of other harmful medicines as well, or harmful chemicals as well. And that argument is like, well, it's natural. It's like, okay, so is arsenic.
Yes.
And so it's not necessarily just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good for you.
Yes.
Yes.
And yeah, so often you'll people will say the entourage effect, and like, oh, if you don't take it in its fully natural form, you're going to lose out on all these other
Mm.
compounds that are supposed to like be synergistic. But I don't think anyone can say that so certainly, and they sort of have to actually maybe isolate each of the entourage components and look at them individually before they can actually make that claim.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly right. And I spoke to someone who was a naturopath and just sort of pointed that out, and and they said, well, like, well, it's probably better to get to do that and to get it in its natural form, because there might be other compounds that actually work synergistically to bring it to better efficacy. And I said, okay, well then be a scientist and isolate them and see what they are and see what dosages they work better in combination with digoxin digitalis. That's what you do, and that's what people did with foxglove. They noticed that sometimes people use this herbal substance and it helped in these certain circumstances. So someone said, okay, what's in there that's doing that? And they went out of the tens of thousands of chemicals in there, they isolated out that one. They found the thing that was helping, and maybe there are more. Okay, find those two. There are ways of doing this. We've been doing this for 100+ years.
Yeah, agreed.
Well,
and I also think that some plants might make a compound that just coincidentally interacts with us in a specific way, like with THC in cannabis, where the plant's using it as like a sunblock, and it just happens to interact with our endocannabinoid system. And then obviously people tend to enjoy that, but it's just a coincidence that the plant's using it to protect itself from ultraviolet radiation, and it happens to interact with our systems.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, these plants didn't. First of all, the plants existed long before we did, and so they didn't. And we're not in the Garden of Eden. God didn't put these plants down here so that we could live in the bounty of his making. They were here before us. They're probably going to be here after we're gone, and they develop these chemicals for completely different reasons. And you're right; it's a coincidence that they work with us. Think of caffeine. Caffeine was developed long before humans existed, and it's developed as an insecticide, to kill insects that are trying to eat it, and certain ones that aren't resistant to it. And we're far enough away from insects that it's not quite working the same way on us, or maybe it's in a similar way, but because we're a lot bigger, it's not having that same effect. So it's having a different effect, and it's lighting up our energy levels a bit. And so we like that effect. We also like the effect of opium and opiates, and that helps in certain ways. But I'm fairly sure that the poppy plant didn't make this just to make us feel good. That's not why that plant exists. The plant exists because it exists, and it's doing this for some other protective measure.
Yes. I still want to get a t-shirt that says coffee is a gateway drug.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't realize. They'll judge people for taking drugs and stuff, but then they're addicted to coffee and they have to have caffeine every day, otherwise they can't survive, and they can go through hectic withdrawal symptoms if they stop it.
Yeah, same with sugar. And and at least that one's starting to become more and more recognized. Like, we know caffeine's a drug and people just accept it, like, yeah, okay, but it's not that big a deal, because it just gives you a little bit of a lift, and that's not that big. Okay, well then just do a mild amount of cocaine. So be a little bit of a lift, and people think that substances are only as bad as the high it gives you, but there are a lot of things that don't even get you high and just kill you, like cyanide and arsenic, so that's not a very good measure of the damage it's doing to your body. It's just a measure of the interaction with your brain and your body to elicit some sort of favorable response. But that's not the damage it's doing, that's actually the part that you like. And opiates make you very, very high, and they are very addictive, but they aren't actually like chemically damaging to our bodies in the way that like alcohol is. And we have people put on long-term opiates for like chronic pain issues, have been in bad accidents for decades and decades and decades. And they are addicted to this, and they have not only habit forming, but addiction forming. And, even if they weren't in pain, they would probably enjoy taking this stuff. But actually quite a lot of people, once they're able to get out of pain, they come right off. So that's actually, I think, is contentious as well. But apart from the addiction side of things, this isn't really damaging your body physically like alcohol does.
Yeah.
And so if you look at sugar, which is addictive in a similar way as heroin, but breaks down in your liver into the same byproducts as alcohol, and it causes similar damage as alcohol: fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, even implicated in cancer and Alzheimer's and more, then, and sugar gives you a little buzz. You look at kids and they're ramping around, they're just all hyper and crazy on sugar, and they start crashing down, start freaking out and screaming, like, I want candy or whatever. And then I have to give these little kids biscuits just to, shut them up. And, that's an addiction response. That's withdrawal response. And that is actually damaging their little bodies to a similar extent as alcohol. So that's actually worse, but it's not getting us as high as heroin, but we think that heroin is worse. But I don't think it's as straightforward as that. You can certainly damage yourself by doing a bunch of heroin, but it's what you're doing to pursue that addiction that's really harmful. Before, when you can just buy laudanum and different opiates at a drugstore, the addiction rate and the abuse rate and the overdose rate were actually much lower, and people would just sort of use this stuff in the background, and maybe it would mess up their life and they wouldn't be as productive. But they weren't having to commit crimes and prostitute themselves and use dirty needles to try to do this, because it was much more available, it was much more cheap, and so they didn't have the same problems. Now you have those problems because you're really trying to get high, you're really chasing this high, and you have to do sort of damaging things to get that effect. But the opiate itself isn't actually doing that harm physically. It's the meta effect, the meta phenomenon, like what you're doing to get that high, as opposed to the high itself.
Yeah, I feel like maybe the unfortunate thing about sugar is, for at least for humans, the unfortunate thing about sugar is there's like not a lethal dose really, and so people don't really take it seriously. Like with caffeine, if you have too many milligrams in a given amount, you can actually have a lethal effect from it. Where I don't know if there is sort of a lethal dose of sugar, you just sort of get fatty liver or other issues over time from taking sugar over and over again every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably is an upper limit there. That they do this for everything. I mean, even water, they tested that half a century ago or more, and they things that would not pass the ethics committee these days. Just basically force feeding water into rabbits till they died, and their blood and their cells got so diluted that they couldn't function, and they just shut down and died. And then sort of extrapolating that out to an animal our size, they estimated it would be about 50 gallons of water. You'd have to drink 50 gallons of water in a day to die from drinking water, right? And so I'm sure there's something. I'm sure there's a number up there, but it's probably very, very high, and something unrealistically high. Like, I've eaten 10 pounds of gummy bears in a day and a half. When I was a kid, and if that didn't kill me, I don't know, you're going to be hard pressed to eat enough sugar, to take someone down. But, long term, you will get serious damage, and that will kill you. That will, make you die young. And a slow poison is still poison. And if you're dying decades early, you're still dying of that poison.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people don't take the whole sugar and food addiction thing seriously. But I've known people who are addicted to like drugs and alcohol, and the behavior is super similar, because I'm like complete sugar addict, food addict. Like, I started binge eating when I was 6 years old. That's the first time I remember doing it. But it's a lot of the same behaviors. Like, you'll hide food, eat in secret, like you get so desperate for the next fix or something. And I've spoken to a lot of people with food issues, and a lot of them have confessed to hiding food, eating in secret, like hiding food in the house, lying to their partners about how much they've eaten. And it's this like bad behavior, because you were talking earlier about why people will be willing to commit crimes to get their next fix. But even like, okay, eating sugar and stuff is not illegal, but people will still get this really secretive behavior. And about 2 weeks ago, I was at somebody's house, and their child wanted another cupcake, and they already had like two. And the mom said no. And the next thing I know, the child stole a cupcake from the like fridge and was trying to eat it in secret. So that kind of secretive behavior around sugar can start from a really young age. If you say no, you can't have sugar, they'll like try to find a way to do it and just hide it a lot of the time.
But sugar's not a drug.
Sugar's not a drug.
Yeah, no. I used to swipe gummy bears, you know, or gummy worms. Like I always loved gummy candies, and yeah, and my mom had a stash of these things, and she had them hidden. They were only for like, you know, like treats. You know, if we did something good that she liked, she'd maybe reward us with something like that. And so I ended up finding the stash somewhere, and I was just, yes. And I just like grabbed a handful of it and just like stuffed it in myself. I'm just like desperately trying to eat this before anyone saw. I ate too many of these things, clearly. So there's an obvious like gap in the gummy bear hoard. And my mom saw that, and she was furious. And like, just go, let me smell your breath, you know, like, and but yeah, you know, you do that, and you're just like, oh, I found it, you know, and like, you know, the kid with his hand in the cookie jar, like, I need this, you need your fix. Like you're going to break the rules, and you're going to tempt fate by getting this. Like, not everyone, other people have more self-control, but you know, it's you know, it's one of those things that that sort of behavior should raise some warning flags, you know. And if you start looking at things sort of in that context, it starts shaping up more, and like, yeah, that does seem like an addictive sort of response and behavior towards these substances, and I think that's exactly what they are.
Yeah. Well, even now, because I'm quite animal based, I was kind of doing the more Paul Saladino way of eating while pregnant. I was doing meats and fruits, and then I had some dairy products. But anytime I eat something sweet, I just want to eat more and more of it. So I have like a hard time controlling how much fruit I eat. And for the past month, I cut out all fruit because I noticed the baby would get cramps because I'm breastfeeding if I ate fruit. And so that for me obviously was reason enough to stop the fruit.
Yeah.
And she seems to do well if I have, so it's just meat, and I'll have some goat's milk and maybe some goat's yogurt. But if I have the milk, then I just want more and more of it because it's like the sweet thing in my diet. So I want to transition to like nothing sweet and see how that goes. But I just don't want to like lose weight too quickly and have that affect my milk supply, or like put my body through a lot of stress because that can also affect the milk supply. So I thought of gradually trying to reduce it until I'm pretty much like zero carb. But it's funny, like even just the milk will make me want more and more and more of it.
Yeah, if I like raw milk, sometimes I'll have that, and I'll end up polishing the whole thing off in like 20 minutes. I just won't be able to stop. I'll have one glass. I'm like, ooh, that was really good. Maybe just one more, and then I just have the, you know, the gallon of milk with me on the couch, just drinking out of it and finish it off. And it's like every time, I've bought raw milk, like it has not lasted the day. It hasn't lasted the hour. And that, yeah, you get that sort of sweet response. And that's the problem with that sort of approach of having some honey and fruit. You know, well, it's okay. You know, people saying that it's all right, and if you're metabolically healthy, it's okay to have something that makes you metabolically sick, because that's what it does. It does make you metabolically unwell. So saying that, oh, it's okay if you aren't quite there yet, you know, it's the same as saying, well, if you don't have cirrhosis of the liver, it's okay to drink. It's like, well, yeah, but no, you know, it's not okay to drink. You are going to cause harm. And if you do it too much, you're going to get that serious problem that you're worried about. And, you know, and as you found out yourself, when you expose yourself to an addictive substance, you know, it may start off with like some here and there, but addictive substances have a way of becoming, you know, becoming all the time. And, you know, even Dr. Saladino has, when he first started doing this, he was eating, I think, pretty, you know, a base amount of carbohydrates from fruit and honey. It's steadily built up, you know, and it's getting just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, just sort of creeping up and creeping up and creeping up. and he's making justifications for why that is, and physiologically not only okay but necessary, you know. And so I'm just not convinced, you know. And I don't think that, I'm certainly not absolutely not convinced that we need any of this stuff. I haven't had this in years and years and years. And you know, every now and then I'll indulge in some milk, but like that's like once a year, you know. And so, you know, I mean, if that, it's not even every year, you know. But you know, there are so many populations that have never eaten a carb that didn't come from meat their entire lives, and living generation after generation, and they're not having any of these serious problems that are being attributed to not eating carbohydrates. And there's, you know, the ketogenic movement has been around for decades. I mean, like, you know, like Atkins, you know, he was saying don't eat more than like 10 grams of carbs a day. Like 10 grams of carbs a day is almost nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's basically, you know, keto. Even some keto people say just, you know, up to 20 grams a day is okay. And so, and Atkins was even less than that. And there was a bunch of people on this. And there's a bunch of people doing keto for decades now. They have not had these problems. They have not had electrolyte issues. They have not had hormonal disruptions. They have not had thyroid disruptions like some people have. And they got these things, you know, in a year or two, you know. So that doesn't make sense, you know, because there are people that have been zero carb for far longer than that, and they haven't had that problem. So there's something else going on.
Yeah.
And whatever that is, I'm not, you know, claiming to know what that is, but it is something else. It's not the carbs, because I have not been eating carbs far longer than that, and I don't have any of those problems. And I'm not the only one. There's millions of people around the world in Western countries who have been doing keto for decades, or at least several years. And then obviously the entire population is going back to time immemorial who don't eat carbs. So I'm definitely not convinced that you have to have carbs. And when you have someone who comes to a carnivore diet or even keto, and a lot of people come to this because they're metabolically unwell and because they're overweight. And then someone says, oh yeah, you can have some fruit and honey. Actually, you know, you need it. It's okay. It's not only okay, but it's good for you. And they go, awesome. And they just start having some fruit, and they end up having a lot more fruit, and then honey on everything, and then more sugar. And then they start eating carbs, and then they're back eating, you know, pizza on the couch, you know, and they put all the weight back on, and all their illnesses come back. And I've had, I couldn't even count how many people have come to me and said that's exactly what I had. They followed that advice, and they said like, oh, this will be fine. They started off with a small amount, and it turned into a large amount within a matter of months. And then they were back to square one. And then, okay, I really need to just hammer this home. So, and as to, you know, what you're doing and trying to get sort of off that stuff, because I mean, look, it's affecting your kid. You know, there's no question now that has things in it that are bad. You know, it's like if you're eating that and that's going through your milk and your child is suffering from it, case closed. You know, even if that doesn't happen to other people, it's happening to you. It's happening to your kid out of the house. You know what I mean? And so you're not going to lose your milk if you eat enough, but you do need to eat enough. And so, you know, just make sure you're filling up on meat every day and eating to the point that it's just like, ugh, it's meat. I don't have an appetite for this anymore. You know, as long as meat tastes good, you should keep eating it until it stops.
Yeah. That's good.
And you'll be fine.
Good. Yeah. So one thing, obviously I've actually over the years been like mostly meat only, meat, salt and water.
For 4 years.
Yeah. For quite a while now.
Nice.
And, yeah, the only thing I noticed with introducing like honey and stuff like that was it had like a performance enhancing sort of effect on my hockey and my ultimate frisbee. But yeah, that's obviously not saying that it's completely no side effects, but I just noticed that I could maybe get 1 or 2 kilometers more in a game, because I track myself with the GPS for every hockey game, for every ultimate frisbee game that I play. And so I'm monitoring how many kilometers I do. So I noticed I could get 1 or 2 kilometers in an hour's hockey game more if I had that little bit of honey. Even like a tablespoon of honey before a game gave me like an extra kilometer of running. Not saying that, you know, it doesn't have any negative effect, but I just noticed that there was a little bit of a performance enhancing benefit.
Well, you know, Yeah, well,
optimal.
do a couple lines of coke before the game too. I'm sure you'll do a lot better too. You know,
True.
um, yeah, smoke some meth, you'll have the game of your life, I'm sure. And but that's that's not but that's not neither here nor there. But also realistically, if you take something like that and it sort of hypes you up a bit more, sure, maybe you have a bit of an edge, and you go out and you sort of hit it and you're working harder. You can already work harder. You can push yourself. You just self-motivate, and you just go like, everything I do is a dead sprint. Everywhere I go, everywhere I'm moving in this place, it's at maximum velocity, no matter where I go. And that was the mentality I had when I played rugby on Carnivore. And every drill that I did, everything I do is at absolute maximal top speed. And I'm going to win every single drill, every single race, every single fitness thing, everything. I will always be first. And I made that commitment to myself, and I pushed myself. I couldn't complete that at first, but I went as hard as I could. And if I lost something, it was I still gave it my all. And because I was pushing myself so hard, and because I was only eating carnivore and I was recovering so fast, I was soon able, I mean, within a matter of 2 weeks, I was able to beat everyone and every drill and every race every time. And so even if it's like on the 10th set of some big, massive sprint circuit, and I'm going against someone who's just been half-assing it the whole time, and then they really go after it to try to be, which they would do, because they knew that I was trying to do that, and so they would try to beat me. I would smoke them, and like that was, but that and that was like about after 2 weeks. And then in games, it was like game days are still fitness days, and so everything I do is at a dead sprint. I go and hit somebody, nail it, I'm up on my feet, and wham, it's dead sprint to the next one, and just go, 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 go. And so you can train yourself, maybe giving yourself a bit of honey, it gives you that bright kick, and it will, but just like a cup of coffee will, or just like, a line of Coke will, obviously not to that same extent. It will just sharpen you up and just, okay, let's go. But you can do that yourself, and you can train yourself to just go as hard as you can every single time. And biochemically, you'll be better able to do that, and you'll be able to go much further, because you'll have an unlimited supply of energy. You will always be able to gain to produce more. Whereas once you eat honey, is a spoonful of honey going to knock you out, spike your insulin enough so that you aren't able to mobilize ketones and blood sugar after that? I don't know. I guess it depends on how big your spoon is, but it can, and it will increase your insulin to a degree, and that will curtail your energy production and mobilization. So at a certain point, you're going to gas out.
Yeah.
And so maybe you're not doing it in the length of these games, but you will at some point. And if you don't do that, and you just self-motivate and be like everything I'm doing, it's just balls to the wall, and I'm just gonna kill people this entire day, and everything is your head. It's like everything I do is at top speed. You'll absolutely crush your honey record. No doubt about it.
Okay, I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also heard some people say if they take like a half a teaspoon of salt before they exercise, they also experience like a performance enhancing benefit. So a lot of people who've reduced their carbs will just make sure they get enough electrolytes and salt before they exercise, and that gave them quite a boost as well.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I was talking to a guy, Nate Clipful, who's like a powerlifter. He does like powerlifting competitions in Nevada. And so he set like several state records in that since going carnivore, and is steadily improving, getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And he said that when he goes to a competition, like for some reason, just putting like half a spoonful of salt right before he does like a really big lift, it gives him a bit of an edge.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's interesting. I think that if people are interested in doing that, you can just gauge yourself and just see if that makes a difference. Could be entirely placebo. It could just be like, oh, am I going to do this? Like, yeah, I had a great time. Could be. I don't know physiologically why that would be, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to try. And if you find a benefit from that, go for it.
Yeah. So we have another question. If somebody has trouble digesting fat, what would your recommendations be to make it easier?
Yeah, because I had a person that I met He was saying that every time they eat red meat, they almost like get diarrhea like crazy. And I was thinking
Mhm.
that maybe they're having difficulty sort of absorbing or digesting the fat, and that it's sort of almost going like straight through them. And so I wanted to know what would help that person,
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, were they trying carnivore, or were they just at any time eating a mixed diet they get
No,
something?
they were basically trying to be vegan, and then every now and then when they cheat and have some meat, then they'd say like, "Oh my word, I got such diarrhea," or whatever, you know.
Yeah. Well, when you're there's several answers to that, and it all depends on how they're eating it. If they're eating that with fiber and with plants and things like that, and not just having a steak. Depending on what you eat, it changes how your body is able to process food as well. Fiber is going to delay the and stop the absorption of all sorts of things, and you have a lot of plants and protease inhibitors and other sorts of inhibitors on your digestive enzymes that will stop you from being able to digest these things properly. And that's a baseline. And if you haven't been eating fat for very long, you haven't been eating, high protein, actual bioavailable protein, then your pancreas isn't going to be tuned up to expel a lot of lipase and protease enzymes to break these things down. And so it's going to say like, well, Jesus, where is it? Where is this coming from? It's going to start going. And now if they kept eating meat, day after day, their body would respond, and their body would be able to then make the requisite enzymes. And so, but if they're so infrequently eating this stuff that they're never giving their body a chance, because your body doesn't just make a whole bunch of random chemicals just because. Very efficient. These things take energy, and if you just squander energy, you die. That's the way of the world in the wild. And so, it's something that we see. I mean, think of it this way: you go the other direction, you go on a carnivore or keto diet. People say that, oh, this is making you, it makes you insulin insensitive. It's actually damaging you. You're becoming almost like pre-diabetic, because when they go back to eating carbs, they do like a glucose tolerance test, and they basically drink a sugary drink. They get this big spike in their blood sugar, and they're like, oh, look at this, your body's just not handling this. But the thing is that your pancreas, if you're not eating a bunch of carbs, keeps your insulin levels very low. Whereas if you're eating carbohydrates, it actually produces a lot of insulin and just keeps it in beta islet cells ready to go, because it knows you're going to need it. It's an anticipatory creation of this insulin. And if you don't use it, eventually it'll just get reabsorbed and won't be used. But if you are eating carbs all the time, then it has a lot of it ready to go. So you eat a bunch of carbs, it goes right, and you don't get much of a response when you're still sensitive to it. And so when you're not eating carbohydrates for a long time, you don't have that insulin ready to go. You're going to fail your glucose tolerance test. But the next time you eat, have glucose tolerance tests or eat sugar or carbs, you'll have much less of a reaction, and it will get down to normal very quickly if you start eating carbohydrates again. So it's the same sort of thing in reverse. Your body's just used to eating certain things. It's making enzymes and things like that requisite to break down those certain things. It could certainly be the fat as well, just not being able to absorb the fat. I mean, they should have some bile ready to go though. And so that at least should be there. But if your lipase isn't coming out and breaking this stuff down properly, well, then they're not going to be small enough for for the bile to emulsify and turn into micelles and then get absorbed into the lymph as chylomicrons. So it's not going to be possible to do that even if you do have bile. So it's I think there's a combination of things there, but that in that particular case, that's what that sounds like. So but if they kept eating meat, they'd be fine.
Well,
Especially if they didn't eat fiber and plants and other poison with it.
Yes. And if someone's had their gallbladder removed, does it affect how you should eat your fat? Should you try and space it out, or does it not?
Yeah, it can do. Yeah, it can. And for people that don't have a gallbladder, and full stop, then yeah, they'll probably have to space out their meals because their liver will still create bile. That doesn't change, but it's not going to be stored in the gallbladder. So it's not going to be concentrated there and then squirted out when needed. And so you're going to need to, so it's going to just be dripping out sort of constantly, just slowly sort of trickling out into your small intestine. And then you're just going to have to sort of eat fat throughout the day and sort of catch what's there. And then later on, when it sort of builds up a bit, do it again. But some people make what's called a pseudo gallbladder, which is just an outpouching of the common bile duct. And it actually just sort of sits there and hanging like a gallbladder. And it works very similarly. And so it's sort of interesting, but that it does that, it's kind of cool. But they don't need to do that. So you'll see people that have their gallbladder taken out and they can eat, OMAD and just a big fatty steak and just fill themselves to their full, and they don't have any problems. They don't get diarrhea or anything like that. And so, that would be those cases, but not everybody forms that. I don't know if I don't know what you'd have to do to help stimulate that body. I think it just happens. I'm sure something triggers it. I don't know what that is. I don't know if you could replicate it, but some people get lucky. If you're not in that camp, then yeah, I think you just space out your fatty meals throughout the day.
Oh, that's very interesting. So if you were to be diagnosed with Parkinson's like tomorrow, what would you do? Like, what would your game plan be?
Well, I think I'm already doing it, really. There's not too much else I can do. Is just, not be exposed to things that are going to exacerbate that, like lectins or sugar or other sorts of harmful neurotoxic chemicals. And give my body and my brain exactly what it needs, which is saturated animal fat and cholesterol, which is what my brain is made out of and what supports my brain and my neurotransmitters. And that's sort of the best I can do. People on a ketogenic diet, there are studies showing that having actually higher cholesterol, higher saturated fat intake is protective against Parkinson's. And there's certainly studies looking at like lectins tracking up the vagus nerve, going into the brain and breaking down the substantia nigra, and being one of the culprits, in one of the many culprits of Parkinson's. I'm not eating those lectins, so those aren't going up and damaging things. But there's a study in, I always forget, but I think it was like the Netherlands. They sort of were tracking that phenomenon and of lectins going up, and that was sort of theorized and later proven that lectins actually do track up the vagus nerve from the GI tract into the brain. And so they just sort of cleverly said, okay, how can we observe this? And they had a lot of people that got their vagus nerves cut for whatever reason. Quite often it was for ulcers, and they would cut those, and so you wouldn't produce as much acid. And so they looked at these people over the course of like 30 years or something like that. And they found that the people that had gotten their vagus nerve cut had Parkinson rates reduced by 66%. It's kind of interesting. So so I just have to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm kind of hoping that because I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm not going to get Parkinson's in the first place. That's the hope. But I don't think I'd change anything. I don't think I'd do anything different. Just keep avoiding bad things and keep giving my brain what it needs. And sleeping and getting a lot of sleep. That is what I would change. I'd cut out this nonsense of only getting 4 hours of sleep a night because I'm working all the time. Just be like, nope, my brain's more important than this. See ya. Just quit half the things I'm doing, and just to get more sleep.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah, my grandfather on my mother's side had that surgery where he got his vagus nerve cut. So I was just wondering, is there any other effects from getting it cut that's probably negative or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So like, the vagus nerve is one of your most important cranial nerves. And it has so many effects on the whole GI tract. I mean, it would be, there's like, entire, chapters and textbooks over that, and so, and more, probably entire textbooks just on that. So the vagus nerve has a lot of function and a lot of communication with your gut. And so, cutting it is, it's not a great thing. I don't think. I haven't actually looked into like what are these long-term effects and like 30 years down the track, what are these guys seeing? I'm not too sure. I know they're getting Parkinson's less, so that's good. But I think it's going to come with a lot of other problems as well. But these are for people that were getting like such bad ulcers that they're getting multiple ulcers and they were getting perforated ulcers and they were getting you perforate an ulcer through the wall of your stomach. You need major open abdominal surgery to fix that. You could spill stomach acid into your abdominal cavity. That can start breaking down and digesting and damaging your other organs and popping holes in them. I mean, it's really, really bad news. And so, it's life-threatening and without emergency surgery. And then you're really banged up as a result of that. And so if you keep getting these things, it's just like, okay, like whatever happens afterwards, it's like, it's got to be better than this. And so, and it probably is, but, it definitely comes at a cost. That's a very important nerve.
Yeah, it's quite an extreme thing to do.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you think consuming coffee can affect somebody with Parkinson's? Because we know somebody who has Parkinson's and they went on like an animal-based diet. They still eat fruits and stuff, but they already saw a lot of improvements. But they have a few cups of coffee a day. Because
that one,
now
Sorry,
they're on mostly decaf. But at first they saw like, oh, the caffeine was making it worse, and then the decaf is better. But I was just wondering, even decaf coffee, if you had any idea if it could affect it.
Well, the decaf coffee, I don't know particularly about Parkinson's, but it will have a lot of pro-inflammatory chemicals in them, and that's why it's so bitter. That bitter taste is your brain telling you like there's something bad in here, spit it out. And so it's going to cause inflammation, which can certainly affect your brain negatively, and just like it will affect the rest of your body negatively. What that does specifically on Parkinson's, I don't think. Well, I don't know of any studies that go into that or say one way or the other, but anything that you didn't evolve on, anything that's going to have these sort of toxins and defense chemicals, it's not going to be good for you. And whether or not it directly impacts your Parkinson's or your diabetes or whatever issue you're dealing with, it's not going to be good and it's not going to be optimal. And so if you're in a situation where you have Parkinson's, you have some other sort of condition, really you need to focus on what is optimal. Maybe, you or I could get away with suboptimal, and most people around the world do get away with suboptimal for a certain period of their life, and then it catches up with them. But when you are outside of that and you actually have a full-blown diagnosis like that, you really need to buckle down and be much more careful about things. And so I think that either way, it would be much more beneficial to him to just get rid of it. Try and swap it out just for some other hot drink. Even like hot water, it actually is fine. It's that sort of comforting hot, warm drink that you're getting that sort of warms you up from the inside. That is quite nice. I've actually, it sounds weird. It sounds like it would just be horrible, but it's actually really nice. It's really comforting. And so sometimes I'll be at the hospital waiting for a case and people will be getting coffee and I'll just get a cup of hot water. It's actually really nice. And, or hot, like beef broth or bone broth. And, if you just substitute out that warm drink for something that's not causing direct harm. And the thing you got to realize about decaf coffee is that there's sort of only two ways of getting the caffeine out of the bean. And one of them is using steam, and they sort of steam the stuff out, and it reduces the amount of caffeine, but it doesn't eliminate it. And also there are 150,000 other chemicals in coffee too. Like, what are those doing for you? Just removing caffeine is probably the least of your worries. And so if you do that kind of decaf, it's still partially caffeinated. And the other way that will definitely get all the caffeine out is by using formaldehyde, which is what they inject in cadavers to, set the proteins and make them, go to the dissection anatomy lab and not rot. So I don't know. And then you can't wash all of the formaldehyde out of there. So you're either getting a bit of caffeine or a bit of formaldehyde. Choose your poison. Yeah. And I choose no poison. Thank you. So that's sort of where I land on that. But it's not just the caffeine. There are other stuff in there that you don't want.
Yeah, I found it amazing how humans can put up with a bitter taste just to get that effect
Mm.
of the caffeine.
Yeah, or alcohol. I remember
Yeah.
trying some alcohol when I was a kid. I was appalled. You know, just like it tasted like just dead fish or something. I was like, oh my God, it was horrible. And you know, and then you sort of chase that effect, you know, like you said, and then you start getting an acquired taste for it, and you know, and you start noticing, like, as far as horrible tasting things go, this isn't as horrible, therefore it's good. Like tequila, what I've noticed with tequila is that the mark of a good tequila is that it tastes as little like tequila as possible. So the less tequila tasting it is, the better the tequila. It's like, okay, well, just don't drink tequila then, because it just tastes bad. And you know, I sort of think of it as like Stockholm syndrome. You know, like kids at first will hate vegetables, they'll hate all these things. They try coffee and like, oh my God, it's horrible. And then eventually they just get browbeaten and abused by, like, oh, it's good for you, it's good for you, you have to have it, it's good for you. And eventually they're like, oh yeah, no, I like it. And I think of that as like Stockholm syndrome. You like fall in love with your abuser, you know, because you've just been told so many times, like, this is good for you, this loves you. And it's just like, you know, like that's what like abusive, you know, husbands do. They're being, oh, no one's going to love you like I do. You know, if you tell the cops, I'll kill you, and all that sort of stuff. And then you're like, oh no, it's okay. I actually like it when he hits me. It's like, no, you don't. Stop that. This isn't good for you, you
Yeah.
know. And it's the same with the broccoli. It's like, I like broccoli. No, you don't. Stop it. You know, if you remember back when you're a kid, you know, I remember back when I was a kid, and broccoli is like the least offensive vegetable I've ever come across, you know, and yet I distinctly remember as a kid hating it and just not wanting anything to do with it. And the only way my mom could get me to eat it is if she made like cheese sauce and just like covered it in cheese. And that was the thought. I was like, well, fat's bad for them, but they have to have the vegetables, and it's the only way to get them the vegetables they have to have.
Yes.
Totally opposite. It's totally opposite, you know. And that was the only way I'd eat it. And I'd like take the broccoli and dip it in the sauce, like just suck the cheese sauce off of it, and then like pretend like I was taking bites of it just so I could get as much cheese as possible and eat as little broccoli as I could. But it's terrible, terrible stuff. And so, you know, when you're a kid, you're more in tune with your genetics, and your tastes are more refined. We think that our tastes are refined as adults, or you get your adult taste, your adult palate. No, really what you're doing is you're beating down your senses. And so now spicy food is not just offensive. It's like, oh yes, I appreciate this sort of whatever. No, it is bad for you. And kids taking it like, oh God, no, that's bad. And you know, they're really getting hit with the full force of this stuff because they haven't, you know, abused themselves to such a degree that they desensitize themselves to that abuse. But it's still abuse.
Like, trust your child's instincts. If they say no, they don't want the food, there's a reason.
Certainly, yeah, exactly. Like it's certainly with bad things. You know, if an infant isn't going to eat something, if it's just like, oh my God, no, you know, then that should tell you something. You should not be eating that. You know, you shouldn't be using your kid as a canary in the coal mine, but you know, you should at least pay attention to that. Now, something tasting good, that there can be an outlier. Like sugar is an outlier. Like carbs are, you know, mildly sweet. They're not that, you know, whatever. But you know, fructose is very sweet, and that's because we think that plants containing fructose didn't have anything that was like so severely toxic to us, would kill us that day. And so we could get like a quick hit of energy and we could survive. And so we recognize that as something, a safe, quick hit of energy that we could use in extremity. But long-term, it's causing serious harm like metabolic syndrome and weight gain. And short-term, it's kicking us out of ketosis. It's putting us into a fat storing metabolism as opposed to a fat burning metabolism. It's addictive, and it also changes your hunger signals, and it makes you overeat. So it has short and long-term consequences. But if you're out in the wild and you're starving, sure, eat an apple. You know, that's probably the safest thing around you. But you know, so that can be an outlier. So kids, you know, might maybe have something sweet, but sometimes those things are too sweet. And I know kids are being raised carnivore and they're, you know, sort of a few years old, and sort of have something sweet, and they're just like, oh no, they don't want anything to do with it. It's too sweet. It doesn't taste good. They're just like, no, thank you. I'm sure they could become addicted to it. I'm sure you could get, there's that little Indonesian kid that they got, smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day, like a year and a half old. And it's like, that's appalling. I'm sure those tasted disgusting at first, but now the kid's severely addicted and is going after it. But, it's, so anyway, if something tastes bad, then it's definitely bad for you. And if a kid is like, just saying, absolutely not, that's not getting near me, on their first exposure to it as like an infant trying solids for the first time, you know that you should just stay away from it.
Yes. Well, we're quite excited about the whole introducing foods to the baby's diet one day, but like certain family members are quite stressed about it because they're like, you can't give meat as the first food for a baby. And then we're just like, well, why not? Yes, that's what you would have
Yes,
done
that's
back
the
in the day. I had somebody told
yeah.
me you have to start with rice porridge and you have to start with things like butternut and fruit purees. You can't start with meat.
Right.
So certain like people, they're quite stressed about it and worried about our child. But we don't want her
Yeah.
to develop a really big sweet tooth. We would like to introduce meat and stuff like that first. And sure, later if she has a piece of fruit after a year or two, hopefully she won't have like want it because it'll be too sweet. But that's
Yeah.
going to be quite interesting, like battling against people trying to convince us to give.
Well, I mean, you get to do it. You get to do with your kid as you want, and as long as your kid's thriving, then there's no legal recourse, so they can, they can keep it to themselves, really. And no, I mean, obviously, we were, what are the Inuit doing? What are the Nanette doing? What are the Maasai doing? What are they giving their kids? This isn't like. First of all, it's not obviously not new because we've been doing this for millions of years, but this isn't all that new just in modern day society. Like if you look, there are ads in their papers in the 1950s talking about how beef and like ground beef and things like that are like the best thing to feed your kid as a first food, because it has all the nutrients it needs, has all the fat that's required, has a lot of energy, and has and it will absorb like 98% of the meat that they eat. Even as infants, they will absorb like 98% of the meat that they eat. And so way less diapers, first of all, just that's a win.
Yes.
And and it has all the nutrients that they need. So that was actually common knowledge back in the day. That was at least common practice. Before all this vilification of meat came in the 1970s and 80s. My great grandfather was a doctor. He was born in 1875. He lived to be 100 at home. Didn't ever go to a nursing home or anything like that. He was 100 years old when he died, and he was still to date the youngest ever graduate from Columbia Medical School in New York. And he actually started at 16 and finished a 6-year program in 4 years. So we finished at 20. And New York state law was that you couldn't start your residency training until you were 21. So we went home and just hung out for a year like the original Doogie Howser, and was a doctor, but couldn't actually practice yet because he was too young. And then went in and did his surgical residency at Bellevue Hospital, and was a surgeon in World War II World War I, and helped with that. He was his father was British, so he actually joined the British Army when that broke out. So even before America joined the war, and he was frontline doctor in the trenches, and and the medical wisdom of that time, of that era, that he told to my mom, was his granddaughter, my mother, was that like juices from the roast was like the best thing to give a kid, that as a first sort of weaning food, because it has a lot of iron and a lot of nutrients that you need, and it tastes good. And it gives them that sort of like, oh my god, like, ooh, what is this food you people talk about? This is amazing. And it gives them that that taste for blood, and then they start liking that, and they're like, oh, okay, well, now what is that? And they see that and they smell that, and they're like, okay, yeah, I want that. A friend of mine, who's my roommate in medical school, she's raising both her kids pure carnivore. She had carnivore pregnancies, and these kids are absolutely just healthier than anything, and they're not only doing well, they're thriving, and they're beating all the milestones by months, so they're developing far faster than anyone else. I mean, literally off the charts. And those kids have only ever eaten meat their whole life. And she's only eaten meat during breastfeeding, basically their whole life up until the first daughter was 3 months. She was having mostly meat and a bit of oats, and then dropped the oats. And then the kid really took off after that. Yeah. And, her daughter, as like, a 1-year-old, like not even speaking much, when she was like cooking dinner and cooking steak, she gets so excited. She's sitting in her high chair and starts slapping the table. She's like, she's getting excited, she's freaking out. And people will be over for dinner going like, "Oh, she's getting really excited." It's like, yeah, she really likes her meat. And if she thinks that, if she thought my friend was like taking too long and just sort of talking and dawdling around and not getting things cut up and served to her fast enough, she'd get really angry and she'd start pointing at the meat and saying, that, cut it out and get that in me now. And she get upset. She says she's never had a problem feeding her kids. Yeah. Not once has she had a problem. Not once has she had, picky, "Oh, I don't want to eat that," and crying at dinner time. None of that. Never. Anytime they're cooking meat, they're just like, And like this little son, she sent me a video of the two of them eating, and had this little kid, it was just like 1.5 years, just sitting there with this giant head like a bobblehead doll, and he just had this chunk of steak in his hand, and he's just and she's like, "Yeah, it's good." Just like growling, like, yes. And he's like just ripping up this huge chunk of steak. It's no problem. And so yeah, don't worry about all that. And they'll see, that your kid is going to be thriving, and she's going to be extremely healthy. She's going to be going past all the different milestones, and just fast as anything. And they're going to have to rethink their view on these things. Yeah. Hopefully they're rational enough to sort of see the evidence in their own eyes and not just go, "Well, that's a fluke," or something like that, some nonsense like that. Yeah. But you'll be fine either way. So just I think just be careful, because people will try to feed them sweets behind your back, which is disgusting to me. I think it's like, what are you doing giving my kid drugs? Why would you give my kid something that's bad for? "Oh, it's not that big. Oh, it's just a sweet. Oh, they like it." It's like, yeah, they like Coke too. Yeah. So yeah, don't give kids drugs. Yes. And also don't give my kid something that you damn well know that I don't want you to give. And so if someone does that, you just got to cut them out and be like, "Fine, look, if you're not going to follow the rules around my kid, you're not going to be around my kid." Yeah. Flat out. And people tend to toe the line after that if they actually, are interested, family members wanting to see their niece or their granddaughter, so, or cousin or whatever. So yeah, just, I'm sure you'll do fine, but yeah, there's just people out there that do silly things. So just watch out for that.
Oh yeah.
That's such a contrast from the story I heard my friends telling me the other day. They're actually also staying in Australia, just north of Melbourne. But they were saying that their first food that they gave to their, I think at that point it was 7-month-old, and they gave Avo as the first food, and almost none of the Avo got eaten. It basically just got smushed around
in his face.
Yeah. And it was like, there was very little eating of the Avo. It was more just like playing with it and not actually consuming of it. So it's quite interesting to see that contrast between like trying an Avo as a first food or meat as a first food.
Well, yeah, because they gave the kid Play-Doh. They didn't give him an actual, meal. And so the kid's just like, "Oh, okay, this is fun. This paste. This is cool." It's like, eat it. Like, why would I eat my Play-Doh? Like, no, stop it.
Yeah. Well, I like the meat as a first food idea. That's pretty cool.
Definitely. Well, look, think about it this way. Try and think of a single mammal on Earth that after they wean off milk, eat anything except what the grown-ups eat, right? When they wean off milk, they eat whatever they'll eat for the rest of their life. Yes. Right? Whether it's meat or grass or eucalyptus or whatever. Yeah, no, that's another story too. That's disgusting. Like all of these plants are very hard to digest, even for like gorillas, like they can't actually get everything they need out of it. They can't get all the B12 that they need out of it. They actually make the B12 in their gut, but then it's past the area of their gut that can absorb the B12. And so they actually have to eat their own feces, even as adults, to actually get more nutrients out of their food. It's really gross. That just tells you just how, I mean, even this animal that's evolved to eat these plants, it's not perfect. They still have to eat their feces in order to actually get nutrition out of it. Koalas as well. It's so gross. I've actually seen a video of this. It's appalling. But like the baby koalas, their guts aren't developed enough when they're young to break down this horrible eucalyptus plant, and so they actually have to eat the feces of their parents, which are only partially digested either. That's called fecal pap. I don't know who came up with that horrible name, but it just sounds appalling. And so they do that, and they're just eating this stuff, fresh out of the smoothie maker, and it's just absolutely just appalling. And so that's what they got to do just to be able to get nutrition out of this. And so but that's the thing. That's what when they're off milk, they're eating the plant or the meat that they'll be eating as an adult with some a bit of help with from their parents in the case of the koalas. But that's it, so it's like, well, it can't be good for kids. You eat something completely outside of the species as the first meal, and then go back to a species appropriate diet afterwards. Like, why would that make sense? It doesn't make any sense. And and sorry, where is the rice pudding in the North Pole? And like someone didn't tell all of the people in Siberia, the net in Siberia, that they needed to actually move somewhere that they could grow rice in order to give their kids that every year, because otherwise they're going to die. What are you going to do? And yet they don't. And so it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. So you have to do this, and yet you don't. And yet when people don't do that, it actually works better. So you're wrong.
No, that's good to know. Before we can say goodbye, where can people find you online?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's my main thing would be my YouTube channel, just Anthony Chaffee, MD. And I have an Instagram page of the same description, just Anthony Chaffee, MD. And then I have my podcast, which is The Plant Free MD. And that has basically all the audio versions of the sort of talks and interviews that I do on YouTube. So you can get those at either location. And then I have some other sort of social media things, and like a Patreon, as well. That's Anthony Chaffee, MD. And I have those sort of linked in with my that you can get that through my Instagram page or my YouTube page, my YouTube videos and things like that, if you're interested. But those are sort of the main three: is YouTube, Instagram, and my podcast.
Oh, wonderful.
And if someone wanted to watch your rugby highlights, where would you go to get that?
Oh man, yeah. See, that's the thing. Like, I actually stopped playing
quite a while back
at that level, like before they really started like taping these things. I've really regretted that, actually. I don't really have any of my old highlights, which it really sucks. I have a few like game films around somewhere, and I've been meaning to sort of get those together. But I played some games that I just I was just like thinking, I was like, man, that was such an amazing game. I'd just love to watch that. And I just didn't get the copy of the tape, or they didn't film it or whatever. And especially in America, not everything was filmed. And so unfortunately, I'll try to get some of my old tapes together and see if I can get some highlight reels. But I don't think there's really anything around, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, because he was trying to look online. Well, rugby is very big in South Africa. It's like our main sport that people like go crazy over.
Yeah.
And Jonathan was trying to find videos online, but he couldn't. So hopefully maybe one day you can get the clips and post them. It might get a lot of people to try carnivore if they're like rugby fans and they see somebody who's like fit and plays well on the carnivore diet. They might be like open to trying it more.
Yeah, especially in South Africa, because here we've got a very meat-centered sort of culture. But they do tend to associate that with rice and potatoes and all sorts of other grains and stuff nowadays. But yeah, definitely a culture that's sort of centered around, you know, meat, and we call it braaiing, which is kind of like a barbecue. That's sort of a
Yeah.
so I think it
Yeah.
could change a few people, as young rugby players' minds to see you in action.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll see if I can do it the next time. If they're still around, they would be at my folks' house, so like in storage somewhere. So I'll have to track them down. I don't have nearly every game, but I've got a few games somewhere, and I can try to cobble something together.
Okay, awesome.
That would be very interesting
Yeah.
to see.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing
Yeah.
to do the interview today.
Yeah.
So
You're very
happy we
welcome.
got to do it.
And hopefully chat again soon.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
In the future, we
Yeah,
can do
absolutely.
part 2.
Yeah. Well, no, it was a pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me on. I had a great time.
Oh,
Awesome.
I'm glad. Well, I hope you have a great day, brother.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.